Thanks so much for coming on the show here today. Really excited to have you on. Could you start by just telling us a little bit about yourself?
Yeah, sure. So current role, assistant AD for Olympic sports performance at Clemson. So I guess this is year maybe 4 in that role, and 10 as like director over strength conditioning, which we now call sports performance here.
Sure.
So yeah, that's what keeps me busy, enjoying that. But all's good.
I love it. And talk to me. I always like to get the background story. How did you get started in the world of sports performance and physical prep?
Yeah, so I think pretty similar to a lot of coaches and practitioners is playing sports growing up. So for me, it was largely baseball and football, and then kind of as I got to the last years of high school, focused primarily on football. Went to Colgate to play football. Career ended early, so by my sophomore year, I was medically DQ'd. And I always knew I wanted to get into this. I actually even wrote it in like our senior yearbook when I was 18 years old. It's like, where are you going to be
cool.
in 10 years? I said I was going to be a strength and conditioning coach at a university.
Wow, that's cool.
So it just kind of expedited that process a little bit. So by the time I'm sophomore year, I'm starting to help out with other teams. And by the time I'm senior year as an undergraduate, like I'm running some of my own groups and all that. So got a quick crash course, which was great. And then from there, was looking for an internship, so sent a million resumes out, and luckily Clemson answered, and my family had actually relocated to South Carolina when I was in school. So started up there back in May of 2006 and haven't left since.
Are you serious? That's the one and only spot, huh?
An undergrad student coach at Colgate, and then I've been here as an intern, GA, assistant director, and assistant AD for Olympic sports performance now. So,
wow,
yeah,
that's
it's
cool.
not your usual trajectory, but it's worked out just fine for me.
I was going to say, it seems like it's worked out. Okay, so like generally, I ask next, because I like to kind of get a feel for the career arc.
Yeah,
kind of gave it to me. So like just pivoting off that real quick, like you talked about these different positions, like how does it work getting up the food chain, right? So you go from intern, which is pretty base level.
Yeah.
Like, could you talk to me about like kind of how your responsibilities have changed? As you've evolved?
Yeah, definitely. And obviously over the course of those 18 years has been an awful lot. And
sure,
at first you're just kind of helping the practitioners and learning how to become a practitioner yourself and exhibit professionalism and understand the trade craft. And then eventually as you work into like GA assistant positions, you're a practitioner where you're spending the greatest amount of, especially back in the day when we didn't have these huge staffs and all of that, it was like
right.
2 or 3 coaches and we all got a bunch of teams ourselves and we're all
grinding.
Working with football, which was probably a better learning ground and learning playground for coaches than what we currently are providing. Right.
Yeah.
And then you're practitioner heavy. Then as you kind of work into, more leadership positions, it becomes more split, practitioner leading your group and connecting dots between different departments and things like that. So, but actually the part I still love the most is the practitioner part and solving problems. Yeah. So it's nice in this position. You can be a coach of coaches.
Yeah.
And not just coach yourself. So it's a unique and fun blend. And obviously I'm biased by my experience, but I think I'm not a huge self-promoter and I understand the importance of relevance for it, but it shouldn't be placed before your self-improvement and your desire to develop a skill set that's going to provide you opportunities for these other positions, right?
Yeah.
And that's what I think I just, did a decent job of, was just keep my head down and just focus on what do I need to get better at? How can I improve, and let everything else fall in place? Where I think a lot of young practitioners get apprehensive nowadays or anxious, like, oh, I'm 28 and I'm not in this position. Like, slow down, just be great where your feet are.
Yeah.
Do things the right way. And I think opportunities will open for you.
Yeah. No, I firmly believe that. And I feel like everybody that follows that approach, it's like anything else. In this day and age, if you're good, people will find you.
Yeah.
But you said something up top, and I think this is so true. I don't know how it is now in the college environment, but one of the things that I loved about being at Ball State when I was there was, like you alluded to, everybody's with football,
Yeah.
right? All hands on deck. I think we had probably 4 or 5 coaches, but we had football. But then, I had volleyball or women's volleyball, I had men's volleyball, eventually I had women's soccer.
Mm-hmm.
But then you're also just kind of around, right? So somebody needs an extra set of hands on the floor, you're out there. It's such a great learning environment because I think at Ball State at the time we had like 26 teams.
Wow.
So just being around all those different athletes and like it's just this massive like playground and learning experience. So when you do decide to specialize in something, and kind of only took me like 23, 24 years to like really put my feet in the sand, but dude, it's just such a great learning experience, like you said, to like learn from this broad base, and then when it is time, then you can really specialize and lock in on something.
Yeah, it's funny. The same exact kind of path myself is. This is only my I think 3rd year just working with baseball. So
really?
you're talking like it's been like 16, 17 years of working with a multitude of sports, and now it's just been these past 3 years where as a practitioner,
right,
daily coaching is just with baseball. Obviously, involvement with the other sports in some way, shape, or form. But I think that it just the more you see, the more environments you're in, the different background of athletes you work with, the better you are prepared for anything that comes your way.
Yeah.
I think that's a tough thing now. Growing up as a coach is a lot of times you're not afforded those opportunities.
Yeah, that's a great point. So, okay, here's where I want to start with this because I got a ton of stuff I want to cover with you. But as everybody that's listening probably already knows, I like to have some back and forth with the guests before the show starts. And one of the things that Rick talked about was this concept of reverse engineering the game and working backwards from the game. So let's just start there. Why is that important for you? Why do you want to reverse engineer the game to set up the stage for better training?
Yeah, I think just the higher level of sport you get to, the less dynamic correspondence there is with general means, right?
Yep.
It's like, when I'm in high school, I get bigger, stronger, faster. That's going to help me in tennis, golf, baseball, football, soccer, almost the whole gamut. But I can only go to that well for so long, right? But the important piece is to understand the sport, the position, the idiosyncrasy of each person and what their physical, their tactical, their technical, their psychological capabilities are and what makes them great or where are the areas they need to improve. And then understanding that and their idiosyncratic movement and all that, then moving and reverse chaining from the game as we get into higher sport, because we don't always get the desired adaptations just from general means. So I live in the baseball world a lot nowadays. Everybody throws like lift heavy, hit bombs, throw gas. It's like maybe for 80% in high school, maybe for 50% in college to some way, shape, or form of varying degrees, and then beyond that, an even smaller percentage. It's like what is good. It makes really great practitioners nowadays the ability to add these levels of nuance and to work backwards from the game, because then you also open the avenue of being able to have these in-depth conversations with technical coaches as well too.
Yeah, dude, it's so funny. I've talked about this numerous times now. And I've had it with athletes. I've had it with other coaches. I think I even had it on the podcast here lately. But this idea of nuance and detail. And I think people are so quick to like just blow through stuff, right? And it's like, look, if you play, again, I'm in basketball. If I'm not going to teach you how to shoot a basketball, I'm not going to teach you how to close out, but the nuance in those things, maybe I can help you just a little bit better. And I think that's where, like you said, when you're starting off and somebody is, 100 pounds dripping wet and they're in 7th or 8th grade, you can do anything and make them better. You can make them a better athlete. But when you get to the highest level, it's in the details, it's in the nuance. And if you're not providing that, I just think your ability to help athletes is going to become more and more diminished the higher they go.
And I think the other bit too is having the very specific developed lens to see and to really understand from a biomechanical perspective what makes them great. Like, what is their superpower, and being able to understand those shapes, positions, kinematics, and kinetics that they can generate. And then you fully understand when and why and how they're at their best, and how to either continually try and get them there, or also understand that their superpower could also be hurting them down the road too,
Right.
right? And it's like this is a complex system that's going to change throughout the arc of a career as well.
Yeah. No, I love that. Okay, so let's talk about kind of how we divvy this up, right?
Uh-huh.
Could you just start by kind of breaking down what you see as maybe the role or the difference between strength and conditioning and the role between like player development and sports performance, like how all those pieces kind of fit together?
And I really think it is merging into one as it should be.
Agreed.
And I think that's like, something I'm really passionate about, and developing our staff and coaches in general for the next generation is like, what's going to drive value for this profession is to cross into the sports performance player development realm. So just in the basic, terminology here, if I think of a strength coach, what's the mental model that comes with that is somebody who gets somebody stronger and somebody who runs them and conditions them, right? All great things, all in some way, shape, or form need to be part of the job. But that's a forward feeding, it's a forward chaining of the process. Like, okay, we're gonna increase a power clean, a 10-yard dash, a 40-yard dash, a vertical jump, and that's going to make a better football player. That's going to make a better baseball player. And yes, and definitely in some cases it will, but it's that ability to actually understand the game. So, and I don't know if I'm getting ahead of myself here, but I'll give the example of baseball. Is like when we have our incoming guys come in, we run through our full assessment. We get some video of them in high school, start to put the pieces together. Then after a few weeks, we have them on our TrackMan system, the Doppler radar. So pitchers, we're looking at all the ball flight, those types of things. So we have our own grading system of each pitch. We have these movement profiles, vertical release angles, horizontal approach angles, all these different things to understand and predict, are they going to be successful at this level? And if so, why? If not, why? And then from there, we can work backwards. And same thing with our hitters. Like, we're looking at how frequently can they contact the ball in the zone? Like, what's their zone contact rate? What's their miss rate? Or if I have a guy that misses in zone a lot, we probably recruited the wrong kid. But it's like knowing these things, and then I can work backwards and start to peel back layers and try to understand what's the why, what's the etiology of these issues that we're seeing, and understand, is this, so like the lens that I look through when I'm reverse engineering this, and all our KPIs in the sport that we're looking at. Baseball is super easy because we have all the data. And we have like the very specific KPIs of the game. It becomes a little more nuanced than some other sports, but it's definitely there. Maybe we'll talk about football, like quarterbacks, things like that later. But I'll reverse engineer it and filter it in a couple buckets. So the first thing I'm asking is output sufficient. So if it's baseball, can a hitter impact the ball hard enough, right? If it's a pitcher, oftentimes we're looking at velocity, those types of things. So first and foremost is output. And within that, if it isn't sufficient, then what are our means to improve it? So first, I'm going to want to go to the lowest hanging fruit, which oftentimes is going to help them create a shape that they couldn't create before, right? Which is just going to help with mechanical efficiency, and the adaptation demands not going to be nearly as great as raising a trap bar deadlift 100 pounds, right? But the shapes may actually be decent, where now it's, okay, you know what, dude? We got to get under the bar, we got to push, and we got to get stronger. And also this is where, Bill's model and is so helpful, is that's where you start to have the lens to understand the idiosyncrasy of their body and their force signature and the shapes they can create, which helps you filter and understand, is it a shape change? Is it maybe it's just connective tissue? We don't have storage and release and yielding capability in connective tissue, or is it really just we need more horsepower? Right. So it starts with output, and that's kind of like how we start to peel back layers in the decision tree there. Maybe output's great. Maybe it's a productivity issue. So it's a pitcher who throws 96, but the shape on his fastball, his ability to throw a slider or changeup isn't what it should be. Okay. So now we have a productivity issue where, again, we kind of go back to shapes. Is it a twist through the radius that's preventing them to get that get on the side of the ball. Like I have an ER, the proximal radius, and IR, the distal radius.
Yep.
I can't get an ER at the hand and the wrist. Or maybe it's a simple change in grip, right?
Yeah.
Is I can change the grip to match where they're at. Now we can create a better shape. So like I have all these layers of productivity now. So maybe output's good, productivity is good. The last bucket for me is efficiency and health. Where efficiency I really use with the pitchers a lot. It's more for like a starting pitcher. It's like, what is the output divided by the effort? So I want to be able to have a moderately high effort, but a lot of output. That's going to be highly efficient. So we're looking at that. And the last bit is like health. Has there been previous injuries? If there has been, then there's probably a need to make a change. So this is like, people ask me all the time, like, well, how do you know when to make a change? It's like, well, this is kind of how I filter this down into these buckets and kind of have these decision models and frameworks that best lead the decision making. But it's still, these are complex systems. It's not going to be perfect. You use that and your previous background, you've cataloged. I've seen this pitcher throwing at this arm slot with these shapes, with these issues before. You know what? My past history tells me we need to undo a little bit of that, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, and obviously it takes a lot of time to build this, but that's where we're going to add a ton of value, because now like we're just, in addition of the technical staff, we almost are technical staff, just with a different lens that we look through. So we help the technical staff say whether this is a technical issue or this is a biomechanical issue, which the more and more I look at it, it's a lot of biomechanical stuff that we just don't understand, and sometimes are labeling it and trying to understand it as a simple technical issue.
Yeah, dude, I love this. And I actually had this discussion with an athlete and their respective coaches a while back, because, they were concerned with this guy's output, right? And his athleticism. And I'm like, I get it. And I start breaking all the movements down. I start watching this kid move. I'm like, dude, maybe there are some output issues here. And like, you put him on a force plate and you look at him compared to like athletes at the same level or the level he wants to get to, he is underperforming. But it's like the underpinning issue here is his ability to move. And like you said, create the shapes that he needs to. Yeah. So it's like, we can do all the things, right? And we can keep beating our head against the wall of like, hey, get stronger, more output. But it's like, until we fix kind of this underlying movement-based issue, we're really working way too hard. And we don't even know if it's going to actually give us the desired result. Like, you've got to get the biomechanical stuff nailed down first, and then everything else downstream will be so much easier.
Yeah, and I think maybe what really ingrained this into my mind and I think made me really hunt being able to articulate this well to coaches is working with track and field for over a decade, because they are everybody's dogmatic about the Anatoly Bondarchuk transfer training, like correlations and all that, where I think they're great, but it's like, so like the thing would be, we're working with a short sprint group, like 100 meter, 200 meter group, right? And hey, this male sprinter is 170 pounds. He's got to be power cleaning this, or this. And in a lot of instances, there is really good correlation, but it's like, I found as these body structures and shapes changed, it's like these KPIs also changed as well too. And I think like track and field was what really helped me on this path of understanding this, because you got the most immediate feedback in terms of the result on the track, right?
They're tracking every day, right?
Yeah.
Like they're tracking something every day.
Yeah. There is no productivity. It's like there's output, and was it better? And obviously with the technique built in that, but it's like, do they jump farther, higher, run faster or not? Yeah. Right. And it's like, that's when I really started, I think. And that's like, even before I dove into Bill's model, I was kind of thinking in terms of like the fascially and mechanically driven athlete and like that lens, but that just kind of led into, and I understand there was a difference in some way, shape or form, but couldn't quite grasp it and have the lens to look through it. And then obviously working in the Bill's model helped clear that up like a ton for me.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think one of the things that can be really powerful too is if you get an athlete in and maybe they're not sold on this stuff, right? Whatever KPI or performance metric they're tracking, when you do some of this movement, however you want to describe it, right? Movement related stuff, you're trying to make them more efficient. It doesn't feel like they're maybe working all that hard in the gym, or at least and when compared to what they would consider to be hard work, right? Like heavy squats or deadlifts or cleans. And all of a sudden you're taking time off their 60 or their 100, or they're jumping a little bit higher. They've got a little bit more velo. All of a sudden they're like, wow, like my numbers are going up and I'm like, yeah, that's how this is supposed to work, right? There is a time and a place for that, but sometimes it's just helping you be more efficient in what you do.
Yeah, 100%. I think the other part that is going to help coaches out a lot in terms of being able to build this bridge and create the values, you have to spend time in the sport talking to the coaches, studying film.
Yes.
So like I think the best physical prep or performance coaches nowadays are the ones that spend the time trying to understand the nuance of technique and movement in the sport. And the best sport coaches are the ones that take the time to start to learn bioenergetics and kinematics and things like that. Every really respected coach I talk to in those areas they're crossing those bridges. And that's like, so you mentioned like, trying to like the buy-in with an athlete early on to do something that's maybe focused more on efficiency, which will indirectly help output, is the way that we're going to be able to do that best is if we can break down film with the student athlete and be able to connect. So okay, I'll give you an example. I have a freshman in right now. I was just doing this the other day. So he's a 6'3", narrow guy, pretty long levers. But really he ought to be able to throw even harder based off his body and some things he can do. But as he goes on a leg kick, and as his knees kind of cross in that 90 degrees, the first thing he does is he kind of spins the foot out and disconnects the like rear foot from the rubber, and he kind of anchors through like the first kind of bending towards the first met head. He's got a rear foot that can't drop any IR, like a super ER turned out rear foot that he just spins out. So the propagation of energy through that foot is just god awful. And so now at the top of leg kick, all his weight is already kind of in this bunion starting to form on, near the first met head. And now that's going to be his strategy to create the delay the entire way down as he drops into like the linear phase. So it's like, that's how, and I talk with my staff about this a lot, is like, we're doing some of these drills to create shapes and all that. If you don't connect the dots, 18, 19-year-old kids aren't going to take a leap of faith. So you got to connect the dots via film and showing them stuff. Like one of the first things I do with our freshmen is I break down a bunch of film and get them to understand these concepts. And the other thing too is like, the easiest thing for them to understand, we do a lot of barefoot stuff, warming up and all that, is to take self-inventory of their feet and their foot contacts and where their pressures are. And we do a couple drills. Hey, we're aimed at doing this. And then they recheck, go, oh, wow, crap. This is actually better. It's like, you have got to do that nowadays because kids just aren't going to take you at face value. No. Right. And so it's like so critically important if you want to do some nuanced things, like you got to connect the dots for them and be able to explain it.
I love it. Okay. So we kind of talked about baseball a little bit. How would you do that in football? Right. Because I know you're working with some quarterbacks too. And I think it's always interesting to hear, because people like just have a tendency to lump all throwing sports and all throwing athletes into like one bucket. So like, how would you do that with, say, a quarterback?
Yeah, sure. And I think it's the same thing. And that's what I've done in the past year is you start with the kind of film and you work backwards a little bit. And that's where, like, if we're, Bill says it all the time, it's all the same. Like it's just the phases of propulsion, right? That we're looking at. And like, I'm going to work backwards from the game again too. So if I'm looking at a quarterback, like where are they most efficient in terms of delivering balls across the field? So like one thing we see a lot with like right-handed quarterbacks is, they struggle on like the deep outs out to the left side of the field. Right. So if I think about this and just think quarterbacks in a football setting, coming from high school, they're doing a ton of lifting, they need body armor, they need force production, right? Those types of things. But like if I'm this narrow type ISA and I get pulled down and forward and then I start to lateralize to the right and my right sacrum's now facing right field, I take a 3-step drop or it's a shotgun, I'm planting my right foot and my sacrum is facing right field and I'm trying to throw a 20-yard out, by the sideline towards the left is just think of the twist I have to create through connective tissue, because I no longer have like this late ER pelvis and femur that can turn me into the left side, right?
Yeah.
So now I'm creating a big side bend through the left side. I'm having to kind of bend below my ribs to push up and get the ER on that right side. And now like I'm sailing balls in that deep out pattern. Okay. Or like something I see a lot in terms of like with upper body development with quarterbacks too, is I compress the thorax a lot and I get a pump handle pulled down. Okay. Is when I break my hands, is I have a low elbow now as I break hands, and I'm getting under, and now I have like a late flip up of the hand with the ball, is now I'm getting under the ball too much to throw a deep crossing pattern, right?
Yeah.
25 yards down the field. Like that may work great. I'm throwing like a corner post where I'm getting air under the ball. Okay. But it's just like, again, I'm working back from where are they successful? Where are they not? And then going back to the shapes that they can or can't create, right?
Yeah.
Or I see a lot of stuff with like foot too, is like, if it is an output issue, is maybe they don't have hardly any early representation on that back foot, right? So their backside, they don't have any delay on. The pelvis is moving too fast that the torso starts to leak early, and they don't create any of that hip shoulder separation, which is going to give them the connective tissue stretch and the power. So there can be a shape change stuff that helps output, but also productivity from the quarterback perspective. And that's where I think like a lot of people, you know, it's obviously improving, but there's a ton of nuance there. And particularly with quarterbacks, people are just relying on really old mechanical models and ways of looking at mechanics and movement, to where there's many more layers to it. Or here's a good example too, is like, you know, like our wider ISA quarterbacks that can pressurize really well from the bottom of the pelvis up, the kind of anterior outlet. So that, like, the one that comes to mind is like Dan Marino, is you think of like before, like he tore his Achilles too, is like when he planted that back foot, he could pressurize and get his guts up so easily. That's where his quick release came from, you know? And it's like, all right, I got a super narrow 6'6", you know, that's like when Trevor Lawrence was here. I didn't work with the guys then, but like, you know, it's a longer arm stroke. Like, you know, it's like understanding these things and understanding the idiosyncrasy of the body before we start to change the mechanics and understand their entire performance.
Yeah. Well, number one, it helps you understand that there's not this one size fits all approach to throwing, right? And hopefully we understand that by now. I'm not sure everybody does. But it also just makes me think back, like, again, I never worked with Andrew Luck, but I obviously loved watching him play when he was with the Colts. And man, if that guy missed high, you could see he was just so over his right side, so right side bent, and you could see he couldn't get over.
Yeah.
Right. And I was like, you could just see it, right? If he started missing high, it was like, dude, I mean, I can see that, and I'm not even like a football guy.
Yeah.
So it's just really interesting now that you're walking through some of this to see how, you know, like you said, the inability to hit certain shapes or to create certain shapes can absolutely impact your ability to perform your sport.
No doubt. It's kind of cool just to, as you think more through this lens, you even think back to groups you used to work with back in the day that maybe intuitively you were programming correctly and getting the results you want, but now you actually kind of understand the why. So like one I always think of is like track and field all those years is like, you know, and I had a lot of like skinny, narrow type, you know, body shapes. And for a lot of peaking blocks, we do a lot of Olympic variations off blocks, so above the knee and all that. I'm like, our jump numbers keep going up. Everything's getting better. Right. This makes sense. I don't entirely know why, but now it's like, okay, I have these narrows that I was getting them to be able to capture an outlet position. Yeah. Pressurized bottom up, right? Or like, I love doing like light and method squats with these groups. I was like, man, when we do these and we do our cleans off the high block positions, I'm like, God, these kids are jumping through the damn roof. I'm a genius. I was like, no, I was just kind of getting lucky and kind of had a sense of it. But again, it's like, I'm taking these narrow structures. I'm making the impulse time shorter with the Lighten method, and like I was just aligning some of these training strategies with the shapes and the impulses and force signatures that were best for their body type. But that's where it's like cool just to kind of, you mentioned luck. It's like you reflect back on these things. It's like, now I think I kind of have a better understanding of why and why not.
Well, and I think there's a great lesson in that, right? Because too often, especially if you've been doing this for a while, chances are you stick around long enough, you're going to have some success, and hopefully more success the longer you do it.
Yeah.
Right. And sometimes you don't always know why, or your theory as to why maybe isn't as robust as somebody else's. So lean into that, but also understand that, hey, somebody like Bill, you dive into these complex models, like, dude, there's a lot to that, but trust your own instincts and then go and seek out resources that will help better explain why what you're doing is actually working.
No doubt. And it's kind of like, Bill says too, like the safe to fail experiments. It's like, Dan Paff, I remember saying this. I went out to Altus like 6-7 years ago. Maybe longer than that. I'm getting old, Mike. I said,
you and me both, dude.
I think it was like 10 to 20% of your program should always be experimental, right? And obviously in a safe to fail environment, you're not putting anybody, but you don't evolve at all if you don't have a small element of that in your program, right?
Sure.
To where in the long term you're doing a disservice to the athletes that you're working with. But it's like you have to explore, but do it intelligently with a specific purpose of what you're trying to uncover,
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so here's something else. I've been thinking about this, and I'm interested to hear your thoughts on this as well, because obviously when we take somebody in the gym, whether we're thinking about it or not early on in our career, we're trying to create adaptations, right? But something you alluded to earlier on is like, hey, even a good adaptation early on can become a bad thing.
Yeah.
So how do you know when somebody has taken an adaptation too far?
Yeah, great question. I think I mentioned a little bit before is, with experience, you start to understand these things a little bit more. So in baseball, we talk a lot about like, pitchers that are using these insane connective tissue, like they're bending through, connective tissue and all the way to bone to create these shapes and positions, right? Especially some pitchers. Like, so the best example of all time is like Tim Lincecum. Remember him back in the day, like the freak for the Giants? Like, think of how hard he like corkscrewed around that back hip. And he's literally just, he's cranking on connective tissue as hard as he could, right? Yeah. And he'd get the pelvis turning that way so hard. And he's a narrow ISA with great rotational capabilities till eventually he hit the constraint of that turn, which was his hip labrum, right? Which, prevented him from doing it further down the road. So it's like you start to see these patterns where you have, I think, a better idea of when these strategies are pushing too hard, right? So, I have one of my former guys, like Spencer Strider with the Braves, who's 5'11", he's been up to 102 miles an hour. For him to create that type of energy at his size, like he's bending the hell out of stuff. And he has this fastball that carries. It doesn't sink much, so it's got this nice approach angle. But he's kind of leaping out of the backside, landing with a late arm, then climbing the elbow like crazy and creating this massive wave of posterior lower compression that's delivering the ball and this massive connective tissue stretch and storage. But there's a shelf life on that. And actually he's blown out his UCL twice now, right? But it is, and for a small guy like that, he's going to have to do things like, so there's also these things in place. You understand the guys and gals that need these to a certain degree to perform. But I think you use, evidence you've seen from other athletes you've worked with, where you start to get a better sense of when this is starting to push too far, right? Yeah. Like, baseball may be a change in a spin rate or a movement profile or those types of things. But, these are complex systems. We don't, we're still.
It'd be great if there was like this very clear point, like, we're getting too close here.
So
you know?
here's a cool one. I was actually this is the random stuff I think about at like 1 o'clock in the morning when I can't
I
sleep.
love it. I'm here
Is the
for it.
Olympics. I was watching Simone Biles. I was like, gosh, man, so impressive what she's doing at this age as a gymnast too. I'm like,
Yeah.
well, what's allowing her to do? And I'm sure she's a pro's pro, and her approach to training, how she takes care of herself. But there's got to be more to it than that. And I think what it is, because with gymnasts you deal with a lot of lower back stuff and knees and Achilles and those types of things.
Yeah.
Is she has the most perfect configuration for the sport, where it's like this wider thorax that really
Yeah.
funnels into her pelvis. So
Yeah.
and like you see her, like when she lands, like how much anterior orientation she's in. But
Yeah.
I think because of the gift of her configuration of her thorax and pelvis, is she can pressurize bottom up so well. She doesn't have to drive some of these strategies through the distal femur, through the tibia, through
Yeah.
the foot, that wrecks a lot of other gymnasts. Because
Yeah.
what she's doing is just, my goodness, to be 27 as a gymnast. And
Yeah.
she looks like
It's
she's jumping
phenomenal.
higher than she ever has.
Dude,
And
did you
has
see
an,
the thing the other night when she's on the ground exercise and it shows her head and she's at 11.8?
yes, it is.
Like, that's wild, dude. She can't be taller than 5 foot, so she's got to have her
No.
feet 6.5, 7 feet in the air, bro.
Insane.
Yeah.
But it's like, and nothing take, I'm sure she's the hardest worker, and mentally
Absolutely.
to do what she does at the pressure she has is absolutely amazing. But I think that physical gift of her structure has allowed her to perform with that degree of orientation for that long. Where somebody where it's kind of like a little wider hips, there's going to be some more distal femoral, proximal tibial stuff going on, L5, S1, where it's took the perfect mindset of an athlete, work ethic, with this perfect structure to be able to hold on to the orientation strategies that gymnast needs for that long has been just so cool to watch.
Yeah. Did you watch her walk?
Yeah.
She doesn't rotate, dude.
No.
I was watching the other gymnasts, and I'm like, is she an anomaly? And yes, she is. Like, all of them have a little bit of rotation. Like, she literally is just, I don't know, man. Like you said, so many gifts, obviously layered in with a ton of work ethic and longevity, but you're absolutely right. Like, the configuration, if you could create the perfect gymnast and shape for it to do it at the level she has for as long as she has, you're spot on, dude. That's really cool.
But I think like those examples and those extremes just help us better understand, for everybody that doesn't have these tremendous gifts, is kind of like where and when we might be pushing too far and too hard with the strategy, right?
Yeah.
So here's an example I run into with baseball a ton with some like the pro teams I do some work with, is like you have a 27, 28-year-old who's dropped 3 or 4 miles an hour from when he was drafted out of college, and you can't use those connective tissue strategies anymore. Like, they've dried out, right? Like, I've squeezed these strategies. I've squeezed the water out to now that strategy doesn't exist, and now they can't create the same output. So it's like there can be a performance element to driving on the strategy too long, but obviously I think the one that comes to mind first and foremost is usually like the health issue.
Yeah. Okay. So this is driving me in a direction that I think a lot of people will appreciate, because a lot of people love to talk about arm care, right? I mean, you're in baseball. I'm not even in baseball. And I hear people all the time talk about arm care and, hey, do these 10 exercises and bands and tubes and all that. So let's just start there. 16, 17-year-old kid comes and they visit Clemson and they're talking about their arm care program.
Yeah.
What's like your elevator speech there about arm care and how you guys approach it? Because I think that's something that would be really interesting to hear.
Yeah. And again, it's funny, this comment out, but I work backwards from the game. So it's a pitcher, like, what is their profile? Are they like they're a four-seam guy that throws up in the zone, maybe a changeup and like a cutter or something like that. So it's a lot of IR pronation type guy. Is it a sinker sweeper guy, a guy that throws he throws a curveball, he throws a slider, like it's real supination bias type stuff. So understanding their body, understanding their profile, and then what are the unique twists that pitcher creates through his arm right? So from the thorax to the scapula to the humerus, radius, down through the hand and fingers. And then how much of that relative motion do they lose after an outing? And then I'm just trying to recapture and undo some of that twist that they create. Right? To where it's like it may be, I'm just doing a portion of that because I don't want to take away too much.
Sure.
But then post, I'm trying to get them back to their starting place. So it may be, I got a big, heavy change up guy. There's a huge IR orientation through the hand. But so what happens with these guys a lot too is they get a lot of shoulder issues, right?
Mm-hmm.
A lot of these big sinker guys, because there's so much of their IR strategy is distally through the hand. It's like, they're always super unique. It's like when they're throwing their best sinkers ever, they're like one more degree of losing IR away from their shoulder barking.
Right.
So it's like, all
That's
right,
how it works,
this is where we are going into outings is let's get right back to that. And then it may be like, and then so cool, we have the metrics of baseball. So somebody's really sinking the hell out of it. Is I got to understand, is it through hand orientation? It could also be we change the grip and it's more like seam effects, like how the ball's cutting through the air that creates sink. So it's like, again, it just goes back to idiosyncrasy, and we're trying to undo the twist that is being magnified when they're performing. And obviously for a starting pitcher, it's going to be more. So usually we're doing that right afterwards. And then, here's a, good thing. Like a lot of people like to do blood flow stuff afterwards, Mark Pro, Firefly, some of these other things, which are great. But we'll do the stuff to try and recapture the relative motion first. And then you shoot some electricity through to help the blood flow. Versus, say I have you
got to open it up, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's like, why would I shoot electricity through a flexor mass when I just shorten the hell out of my radius? Right. So it's like, let's untwist that a little bit, and then let's go after some blood flow techniques and things like that to help with recovery. So it's just kind of going back to the game, and even it's, some foot and lower body stuff too, because that's obviously going to impact how energy is transferring from the thorax down through the hand as well too.
Yeah.
The quarterbacks, it's a lot of stuff at the shoulder. So just think you don't have the same differential of ER to IR because the implement
it's so
weight,
much bigger.
Right? So I don't see as strong like hand strategies as much with like the quarterbacks as you do a lot of times with the pitchers. So you're going after pump handles, DR compression, some stuff like that. Because the thing too, with football is like a lot of times it's not as much a part of the culture of like looking at acute to chronic ratios of throwing. Right. Where it's like it's built into baseball. But like football, it's like, starting preseason, like our guys need to be throwing 4 or 5 times a week before increasing volume intelligently. So it's like some of those things that aren't as much a part of like football quarterback culture, it is baseball that you're trying to slowly grow and evolve.
Yeah. Okay. So now you've got me really fixated on this. So when you're thinking about this, how much do you integrate with medical, soft tissue, all that stuff to really try and get the changes that you want, right? And this could be in like a just entry-level environment. This could be in a post-game environment. But, I mean, are you having all those discussions? Because I would assume, I mean, you're throwing everything at it, right?
Yeah, definitely. So, like, a guy finishes throwing, he'll come in the bullpen. We'll kind of have our little routine. And then oftentimes, like the morning after, go see the athletic trainer and kind of know the target spots that we need to go after. And then they may do needling or cupping or stuff like that, where it'd be a little more intensive, a little more of an input to drive some of the relative motions in specific places, or if need be, even like the team chiropractor or something even more heavy of an input to try and pull that back out. But yeah, there's like kind of these different pit stops along the way where it's like, we're kickstarting the process afterwards, and then like, the morning after, with our medical staff doing some more intensive stuff, and then I'll get them in the gym, get them on the table, check our measurements. I like having, whether it be like a toe touch or it's a standing rotation or something, like one kind of key movement. It could be like a front foot, looking at the front foot on a split squat, something like that with each guy, that we can kind of periodically check throughout the session and stuff like that. So that's oftentimes most of our guys, that's what I'm doing the day after. It's just kind of like the KPI of each guy is like kind of getting back there and seeing where we're at.
That's so cool. So cool. It's just, again, when it's either myself or just Billy and I, right, it's still pretty cool, right, to collaborate with two. But the more resources you have, when you can bring in soft tissue, because we do have a great soft tissue gal, so when you can start to bring all those pieces in and you've got like literally the exact person you need for all those jobs, it's just so cool the changes that you can see in your athletes.
No doubt. And from performance perspective too,
Yeah.
That's where I think you had Jen on the show, right? Jen Reiner, Marcelo. Yeah. So like, Jen's a good friend, talk to her all the time, but like, kind of always bouncing ideas off her and people, Mike K as well too. People like that, just kind of, so I think they help with too is like, obviously, and Bill, huge influence on that. It's like,
right.
What are the means of, proxy manual therapy, foam roller using the ground that we can use in the gym that kind of, because, the medical staff, like they're more time intensive with each person where we're using a larger group is like, what are the kind of proxy things we can do to replicate? Because the thing that these kids are going to need is a volume of the stuff to actually make changes,
Absolutely. And they're not always going to have access to all the same resources or same level of resources. Yeah. So I think that's important. Okay. So before the show, you had mentioned finding ways to show and create value for yourself beyond the traditional sphere of influence in S&C.
Yeah.
So I'd love to hear, what do you mean by that?
Yeah.
And how can we as coaches go about doing that?
Yeah, I think it's really just like what we've gone over the last so many minutes.
Yeah.
Is like, if you can help these coaches connect the dots, and you can help, because so like when we have recruits, like the coaches will send me the video first. I'll kind of break down the structure, mechanics, like here's window of opportunities, here's maybe some threats with how they move. It's like, we have the best lens to give them feedback on those types of things, or like, this is why I've kind of narrowed into like baseball. It's like, it's a little more closed environment. Like I can say, hey, let's change the stance and the setup on this guy, right? Like in soccer, I did soccer for 10 years. It's like, not doing that in soccer, right? There's too much going on.
A lot of
There's
chaos.
too much action, perception, action, coupling, It's like you can make these changes in the baseball environment, like I can change, the type of loading strategy in a pitcher, grips, all these types of things where, that's not my job, but I help inform and have conversations with the technical staff so then we can work together to kind of make those changes and reassess and those types of things. Right.
Yeah.
So that's like, that's where I want to see our field keep growing, is that ability to reverse chain from the game and provide this value to the technical coaches beyond just, Johnny or Susie, they got our athletes stronger, they look better. It's like, there's no doubt there's value in that. Okay. But there are some other windows for us to really add value. And that's where you're going to gain a lot more respect, where we are going to gain more respect in this industry is being able to do those types of things, because here in the environment I work in, Mike, Division I athletics, we're well resourced, those types of things. It's not that hard to get somebody bigger and stronger.
No, it's not.
Right? You could go pull somebody from the commercial gym who spent 4 weeks doing some online certification, and they're going to be able to get them bigger and stronger with the way these kids are, food that's provided for them, nutrition, all these types of things, the training equipment, everything we have. It's like, that's not that hard. Let's be honest with ourselves. Like, the tough thing is like all these other layers of enhancing performance and taking right to the line of performance, but not pushing beyond, a breach of tissue and health is like, that's where we're going to have value, in our industry, and particularly like college environment where there's constraints and budget and those types of things. That's how I think we help make it better for the next generation, hopefully.
I agree, man. And I think one thing that you've expressed, and I think it's so important to kind of beat this point home. I think before, when people would give S&C a bad perception, right, or a negative perception, is when S&C was just about S&C, and they couldn't talk about the sport or have a valid discussion with the sport coach. Like, I'm never going to be able to talk X's and O's with a basketball coach, but I can have that discussion of, hey, you want this guy to be better defensively. Here are the biomechanical reasons he cannot do that.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Or here are the force-producing reasons he cannot do that. Here's how we can help you connect the dots.
Mm-hmm.
So the second you can bring it back to them and help them understand, hey, here's how I can make you a better basketball player, not just, like you alluded to, give them a bigger squat, bench press, deadlift, power clean, whatever. The second I can talk your language to some degree and some level of competency and prove to you that I can give you a better athlete, immediately you're going to get better buy-in. You're going to have better conversations and relationships with those coaches.
100%. Yeah, that's what I'm always working with my staff. Is like, learn the language, learn to speak the language.
That's a big one.
Like, if I was a sport coach, I would be slow to kind of let in the degree of influence of like a performance coach until I knew they really understood. Like, that's the way it should be. And if a sport coach isn't challenging you that way, they're probably not very good. To be honest, right? So it's like, don't take that as an offense. Look at that as an opportunity I got to dive into this. Like, so I got work with soccer forever. It was like, I had to really understand the game model of our coaches and our program to then better fit, the guys and gals at these different positions to be ready to play within this model. Yeah. That's when and then, in our environment, they give you more time and access to them because they know you're trying to work backwards from what's needed in the game, right?
Yep. I love it. Also, if you are still listening and you have questions about how to go about this and learning more about the game, I'm going to reference a show I did with Aaron Kunanen, former iFast intern. I believe he is still with the Reds. But yeah, he went into UFC and worked there for a while. I don't think he had any experience in MMA, so he had to learn that. Then he moved into professional baseball. So he's a great one. And I mean, it could be as simple as, hey, I'm not super familiar with your sport, but I'm tasked with working with your sport. Can I come watch a practice? Hey, can I come, like, the more you show you're willing to invest and learn in the sport, then that's also going to open doors and strengthen those lines of communication with coaches.
No doubt. Absolutely. And particularly, I think, like these more closed environment, baseball, golf, tennis, where you can change your setup in a serve and a swing, like, there are huge windows to have some influence in those areas.
Yeah, agreed. Okay, man. Big question time. If you could alter the space-time continuum and give young Rick Franzblau one piece of advice, what would it be?
Good question. Don't try and be the reason for success. So I think early on, this is like, I think I grew out of this over the course of the first 4 or 5 years, but like, you want to have your impact and your influence, right?
Sure.
But you don't need to be the reason. You don't need to try and be the reason that student athlete, improved. And you're a stakeholder. Your job is to help facilitate the process, to help others make the process easier as well too. But that's a really selfish, ego-driven approach to try and validate what you're doing and feel good about what you're doing.
The sooner you can remove your own ego from the equation, the easier it is and the more gratifying it is to be a coach, for sure.
No doubt. But that'd probably be the one, like, first getting started, I'd go back and try and do better.
Let yourself know that.
Yeah.
That's cool. I like it. Okay, dude, last but not least, lightning round. So 4 fairly short questions. Your answers can be as long or short as you like. Number 1, what's your favorite thing about working in baseball?
I think the way you can influence being a performance coach, right, is you can really be a player development coach because of just the environment of baseball and it being a little more closed, I can really help influence a change in a swing and a wind up, all those types of things,
Yeah, for sure. I love it. Okay, number 2. Biggest takeaway from working with Bill all these years.
Oh boy, gosh, this could be its own podcast.
I know, right?
I would say, and I kind of alluded to it's, understanding it's all the same. When you're looking at propulsion, like if you really understand, that's what Bill's always talking about, like the foundational. If you get to understand the foundational principles, which I think nobody will ever understand as well as Bill, right?
Right.
But you really start to sink your teeth into it, is then kind of moving to a different environment and stuff like that becomes so much easier. Like looking at a tennis serve for the first time, or an offensive lineman, like kick step or something like that. It's like you have a different lens, and it's all the same. There's in some way, shape, or form, there are all those phases of propulsion, and when you really understand that, like, it opens your eyes to some pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, it definitely makes it easier, right?
No doubt.
It starts to bring everything under the same umbrella versus thinking everything is all these different unique things, right? Mm-hmm. I love it. Okay, number 3. Did you look ahead at these?
No, I don't think I did.
Okay, good. How did I never know that you graduated from Colgate? My dad went to Colgate, dude. It's such a random college. Yes.
No kidding. That's pretty cool.
Small. Yeah. No, it's a small world, number 1, but and I'm going to let you answer that. But he would tell me this story about, I don't know, whenever the 60s or whenever he was in college, talking about he walked out his front door one day and there was so much snow, literally like the door was covered from like a blizzard. And I'm like, yo, that sounds crazy.
I remember my junior year, I couldn't get to my car for an entire week because like there was 4 feet of snow. Like you couldn't even get to the parking lot to get oh my goodness. But I tell you, if you're going to go hard at your academics and have a little fun on a really small town, I played football too. I was medically DQ. It's a good place to lock in because there's not a lot of other distractions. You're in the middle of nowhere. The weather sucks. You can't go outside for 90% of the year. So it kind of like forces you into this environment of kind of being locked in, which I guess is good when you're 18 years old,
I probably would have done better there.
Make a million bad decisions, right?
Yeah. I love it. Okay, number 4, last but not least, what's next for Rick Franzblau? What are you working on, excited about?
Yeah, just obviously fun projects here at Clemson, doing a lot more consulting, starting to kind of bridge into football and quarterback some more. Just trying to apply these concepts into some really deep player development is kind of what I'm hell-bent on and want to keep getting better at. And then I think to look forward to is actually myself, Jen, and Zach Bove, who's a pitching coach of the Royals. We're hopefully going to have a course together winter, Christmas time, kind of diving into some of these concepts with baseball. So
that's cool.
Hopefully we're now finally saying that, so then we have to commit to getting it done.
Yeah, you got to get it done now because December I'm going to be expecting this. It's got to be ready.
It was a good time. Like, you got the pro teams. It's like off season, even college people too. So hopefully by that point we'll be releasing that.
That's awesome.
So yeah, that's kind of those are the projects, but it's been fun.
I love it, man. I love it. Well, Rick, it's been amazing catching up with you today. I feel like there's some really high value stuff in here. Where can my listeners find out more about you and all the great work that you're doing, man?
Yeah, so I just got off my 2-year self-imposed social media
wow, 2 years
ban. Yeah.
Okay.
I was like, that stuff I'm putting out is not very good. I need to get better. So 2 years took off. Just like 4 weeks ago, started putting stuff on there. So Twitter, I think it's at Franzblau Rick. And then this is like our department page on Instagram is Clemson Ollie Performance. So that's not mine, but it's our department that we go off there. So no way in hell I'm going to put time into 2 or 3 different social media platforms. So, but occasionally you can find a Twitter post from me. So there you go.
Okay. I love it. Well, I'll make sure I link to those in the show notes. And again, Rick, dude, this was amazing, man. Thank you so much for coming on.
Yeah, sure thing, Mike. Enjoyed it.